The Galactic combat arena had seen many things in its 3,000-year history, but nothing quite like this. Commander Vex Thar of the Krillian Empire sat in his luxury viewing pod, all 6 of his eyes focused on the massive holographic display showing the arena floor below. His mandibles clicked in what humans might mistake for laughter, but any Krillian knew better. That sound meant someone was about to die. "You're telling me," Vex Thar's voice carried that distinctive metallic rasp of his species, "that a human has registered for the Apex Predator Championship?" His aide, a nervous Zelthran named Kul Tok, shuffled through his datapad with trembling tentacles. "Yes, sir. The registration came through the Terran Embassy 3 cycles ago. They've paid the entry fee and everything." Vex Thar's laugh was like grinding metal. "Aeaman, those soft pink bipedal creatures who need to cook their food and can't even see in the dark properly." He gestured with one of his 4 arms toward the arena. "Do they have any idea what they're walking into?" Down in the arena, the previous match had just concluded. What remained of the Vorthak warrior was being scraped off the walls by maintenance drones. The victor, a towering megalith from the Andromeda sector, raised its boulder-like fists in triumph. Its rocky hide glistened with the fluorescent blood of its opponent. "The human's name is Marcus Steele," Kul Tok continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Age 32, height 1.8 meters, weight 79 kilograms. 79 kilograms. Vex Thar's eyes widened. "My breakfast weighs more than that." "Are you certain this isn't some elaborate joke?" The truth was, throughout the galaxy, humans had developed quite the reputation. Not for being warriors, mind you. They were known for their peculiar habit of befriending literally anything that moved, their obsession with small furry creatures they called pets, and their bizarre tendency to put flavor enhancers on everything they ate. The idea of a human entering the most dangerous combat tournament in known space was like watching a butterfly challenge a star destroyer. "Sir," Kul Tok's voice took on an even more nervous tone, "there's something else." The human specifically requested to fight Gorvek the Destroyer as his first opponent. Now that got Vex Thar's attention, all 6 eyes swiveled to focus on his aide. "Gorvek? The same Gorvek who's won 47 consecutive matches. The one who literally ate his last 3 opponents." "The very same, sir." Vex Thar leaned back in his chair, a sound like grinding gears escaping his throat. "Well, this should be entertaining. At least it'll be over quickly." 3 decks below, in the competitor preparation area, Marcus Steele was doing something that had the alien medical staff completely baffled. He was stretching. Not the violent, roaring, territory-marking displays that most warriors engaged in before combat. Just stretching, touching his toes, rotating his shoulders, doing something called jumping jacks that made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. Dr. Yith Ran, the arena's chief medical officer, watched with 4 of her compound eyes while the other 6 monitored her instruments. "His heart rate is barely elevated," she muttered to her assistant. "His stress hormones are practically non-existent. Is he perhaps suffering from some form of neurological damage?" The assistant, a young Aquarian named Blue Fell, shook his head. "All scans show normal human brain activity. If anything, he seems relaxed." Relaxed. Dr. Yith Ran's antennae twitched. He's about to face Gorvek the Destroyer, and he's relaxed. What kind of species are these humans? Meanwhile, in the VIP section, word of the unusual match had spread. Dignitaries from across the galaxy had gathered to witness what many were calling the great human mistake. Lady Sith Ara of the Crystalline Dominion had even adjusted her social calendar to attend. "I've heard they're quite fragile," she was saying to her companion, a wealthy Plutonian merchant named Kex Tor. "Apparently they can die from something as simple as falling down incorrectly." Kex Tor nodded sagely. "My cousin trades with them occasionally. Says they have to wear special suits just to visit most planets. Can't handle different atmospheres, different gravity, different radiation levels. Honestly, it's a miracle they ever made it off their home world." In the arena's main commentary booth, the famous sports broadcaster HFY was preparing for what he expected to be the shortest match in tournament history. His co-commentator, a former gladiator named Throktar, was already composing his eulogy for the human. "Ladies and gentlemen, beings of all species and dimensional planes." HFY's voice boomed across the arena. "We have a most unusual match for you today." In the challenger's corner, weighing in at a mere 79 kilograms, standing at what can only be described as an adorably small 1.8 meters, from the third planet of the Sol system, Marcus Steele. The crowd's reaction was immediate and predictable. After, lots of it. The sound echoed through the arena like a symphony of amusement. Some beings were laughing so hard they were crying. Others were taking bets on how many pieces the human would end up in. Marcus emerged from the competitor tunnel, and the laughter somehow got even louder. He was wearing what appeared to be simple black clothing, no armor, no weapons. Nothing that would suggest he was prepared for combat with a creature that had literally crushed opponents into paste. He waved at the crowd with what looked like genuine friendliness. And in the champion's corner, HFY continued, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, weighing in at 430 kilograms, standing 3.2 meters tall. With a perfect record of 47 wins and 0 losses, the undisputed apex predator of the known galaxy, Gorvek the Destroyer. The arena shook, not from the crowd's cheers but from Gorvek's footsteps. The massive Vorthak warrior emerged from the opposite tunnel, and even the most seasoned combat veterans in the audience felt a chill. Gorvek was a nightmare made manifest. His exoskeleton was black as void, covered in natural armor plating that had deflected everything from plasma cannons to molecular disruptors. His forearms ended in claws that could shear through titanium. His head was a horror of multiple eyes, razor-sharp teeth, and mandibles that could crush a skull like an egg. But what made Gorvek truly terrifying wasn't his physical appearance. It was his intelligence. Unlike most apex predators, Gorvek was smart, tactically brilliant. He studied his opponents, learned their weaknesses, and exploited them with surgical precision. He'd once defeated an entire squad of Martian shock troopers by using their own battle formation against them. The two fighters approached the center of the arena. The size difference was comical. Gorvek towered over Marcus like a mountain over a pebble. His shadow completely engulfed the human. You know, Gorvek's voice was like grinding stone. "I almost feel bad about this. It's not sporting to kill something so small." Marcus looked up at the massive creature with what could only be described as mild interest. "You're bigger than I expected. That's going to make this interesting." The crowd fell silent. Did the human just threaten Gorvek? The same Gorvek who had once killed her opponent by looking at them too intensely. Gorvek's multiple eyes focused on Marcus. "Interesting. Little creature, I'm going to tear you apart so slowly that your death will be studied in tactical academies for generations." "Yeah, about that," Marcus said, rolling his shoulders one more time. "I should probably mention something before we start." "What's that, little morsel?" Marcus smiled. It was a perfectly ordinary human smile, but something about it made several spectators in the front row suddenly feel the urge to move to the back of the arena. "I'm not just any human. I'm a human who's had a really bad week." Klashak, a traditionally neutral crystalline being, raised his prismatic arm. "Combatants, prepare for battle. Remember, this is a fight to the death or surrender. No weapons, no outside assistance, no appeals to higher powers. Begin when you hear the signal." The arena held its breath. Betting pools were closed. Recording devices focused. This was either going to be the most one-sided slaughter in combat history, or, well, no one could actually think of an alternative. The signal blared across the arena. A deep, resonant tone that had started thousands of battles. Gorvek moved first, as everyone expected. His massive frame lunged forward with surprising speed, claws extended, mandibles spread wide. His battle cry shook the arena's foundations. Marcus sidestepped. Not dramatically. Not with some flashy combat maneuver. He just moved slightly to the left. Govek's charge carried him past the human, his claws raking empty air. The massive predator spun around, confusion evident in his multiple eyes. This wasn't how his fights usually went. His opponents either tried to run, tried to fight back, or simply froze in terror. They didn't casually sidestep like they were avoiding a puddle. Interesting footwork, Throktar commented from the booth, his voice uncertain. Though I'm not sure what the human hopes to accomplish with evasive maneuvers. Govek attacked again, this time with a more calculated approach. He swung his massive arms in a pattern designed to cut off all escape routes. It was a technique that had worked on countless opponents. Marcus ducked under the first swing, leaned back from the second, and somehow managed to slip between the third and fourth. He ended up standing exactly where he'd started, looking completely unbothered. "You're pretty fast for something so big," Marcus observed conversationally. "But you telegraph your attacks, you drop your left shoulder before you swing, and you always lead with your dominant right claw." The crowd was starting to murmur. This wasn't normal. Humans weren't supposed to be able to analyze combat patterns while dodging attacks from apex predators. Govek's eyes narrowed. He'd been studying opponents for decades, and this human was different. There was something about the way he moved, the way he spoke, the complete absence of fear in his demeanor. It was unsettling. "Lucky dodges," Govek growled. "Let's see how you handle this." The massive predator suddenly changed tactics. Instead of relying on brute force, he began using his environment. He grabbed a chunk of arena debris and hurled it at Marcus with devastating force. Marcus caught it with one hand. The arena fell completely silent. The chunk of debris that Govek had thrown weighed approximately 200 kilograms. It had been hurled with enough force to pulverize a normal being. Marcus had caught it like someone might catch a ball, examined it briefly, and then tossed it aside. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet arena. "I think I've figured out your style. You want to try this again, or should we skip to the interesting part?" Govek's mind was racing. In 47 fights, he'd never encountered anything like this. The human had just demonstrated strength that should have been impossible for his species. But more than that, he'd done it casually, like it was nothing special. "What are you?" Govek asked, his voice uncertain for the first time in years. Marcus considered the question. "Well, technically I'm a maintenance engineer from Lunar Station. But right now?" His expression changed. The mild, friendly demeanor was replaced by something that made Govek's instinct scream warnings. "Right now I'm a human who's having a very bad week." "A bad week?" Govek couldn't help but ask. "Oh yes, see, my girlfriend broke up with me on Monday. Tuesday I got fired from my job for excessive creativity in my engineering solutions. Wednesday I found out my apartment was being demolished. Thursday I discovered my savings account had been emptied by identity thieves. And Friday..." Marcus smiled again, and this time even Govek felt the urge to step back. "Friday I decided to do something about my stress levels." The crowd was hanging on every word. This conversation was not going according to anyone's expectations. "And you thought entering a death match would help with stress?" Govek asked, genuinely curious despite himself. "Well, my therapist did say I needed to find a healthy outlet for my emotions. And honestly..." Marcus began walking toward Govek, his movements fluid and purposeful. "I've been holding back my entire life, following rules, being polite, trying to fit in with galactic society. But you know what? Sometimes a human just needs to let loose." Govek found himself backing away. This shouldn't be happening. He was the apex predator. He was the one who made others retreat in fear. But something about this human's approach was setting off every survival instinct he had. "You see," Marcus continued, his voice conversational but somehow carrying an undertone that made the arena's very air seem to vibrate. "Humans have this funny thing called adrenaline. Most species have something similar, but human adrenaline is special. It's what let our ancestors hunt creatures 10 times their size with nothing but pointed sticks. It's what makes us do impossibly stupid things like charge machine gun nests or run into burning buildings to save strangers. Gorvik's retreat was becoming more obvious. The crowd was starting to notice. Whispers were spreading through the stands. "But here's the thing about human adrenaline," Marcus said, and now he was close enough that Gorvik could see his eyes. They were brown, ordinary brown human eyes, but there was something behind them that made Gorvik's exoskeleton crawl. "It doesn't just make us brave, it makes us strong, fast. It makes us ignore pain, ignore fear, ignore little things like physical limitations and common sense." "You're trying to intimidate me," Gorvik said, though his voice lacked conviction. "No," Marcus replied. "I'm trying to warn you. Because right now my adrenaline is kicking in. And when a human's adrenaline kicks in, especially a human who's had a very bad week, well, he flexed his fingers, and the sound of knuckles cracking echoed through the arena. Things tend to get interesting." The arena had become a pressure cooker of anticipation. Beings who had come to watch a simple execution were now witnessing something unprecedented. A human, one of the galaxy's most supposedly fragile species, was somehow making the most feared predator in known space nervous. Gorvik made a decision. He stopped retreating and launched himself forward with every ounce of strength he possessed. His claws extended, his mandibles spread wide, his multiple eyes focused on the small human with lethal intent. Marcus moved. But this time he didn't dodge. He met Gorvik's charge head-on. The impact should have pulverized Marcus instantly. Instead, the arena shook as two forces collided. Gorvik's unstoppable charge met something that refused to be moved. When the dust settled, both fighters were still standing. But Gorvik was staring at his right claw in shock. It was bent. His natural weapon, harder than reinforced titanium, sharper than a molecular blade, was bent at an impossible angle. Marcus was holding it, with his bare hand. Like I said, Marcus mentioned casually, "bad week." Then he twisted. The sound that came from Gorvik was unlike anything the arena had ever heard. It was part roar, part scream, part something that had no name in any language. One of his primary weapons had just been rendered useless by a creature that shouldn't have been able to scratch his armor. "How?" Gorvik gasped, cradling his damaged claw. "Physics," Marcus replied. "See, most species develop their strength to match their environment. But humans? We developed on a death world. It's a planet where literally everything was trying to kill us. A gravity that would crush most beings, weather that could freeze or boil you in hours. Predators that made you look like a house pet. We didn't just survive it, we conquered it." Gorvik tried to swing with his other claw, but Marcus was already moving. This time he didn't just dodge or block. He went on the offensive. The first punch landed square in Gorvik's midsection. The arena's instruments registered the impact as equivalent to a small explosive device. Gorvik doubled over, his exoskeleton cracking. And the best part, Marcus continued, his voice never losing its conversational tone even as he delivered devastating blows. "We learned to do it together. Humans are pack hunters. We share information, we coordinate, we adapt. Every human who's ever lived has added to our collective knowledge of how to kill things that are bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we are." The second punch caught Gorvik in the throat. The massive predator staggered backward, gasping for air. "You want to know what I did for a living?" Marcus asked, advancing steadily. "I was a maintenance engineer. My job was to fix things that were broken, to find solutions to problems that everyone else said were impossible. And right now?" He smiled, that terrible, friendly smile. "You're a problem that needs solving." Gorvik made one last desperate attempt. He lunged forward with his remaining functional claw, putting everything he had into a strike that should have bisected Marcus cleanly. Marcus caught the claw. Not just stopped it. Caught it, held it, and then did something that made the entire arena fall silent. He crushed it. The sound was like breaking crystal, like snapping bone, like the death of something that had never been meant to die. Gorvik's remaining weapon crumbled in Marcus's grip. "No," Gorvik whispered, staring at the ruins of his claws. "This isn't possible. I'm the apex predator. I'm the strongest creature in the galaxy." Marcus looked at him with what might have been pity. "You were the strongest creature you'd ever met. But you see, Gorvik, you made one critical mistake." "What mistake?" "You challenged a human who'd had a bad week." The final blow was almost anticlimactic. Marcus simply reached out, grabbed Gorvik by the head, and squeezed. The massive predator's exoskeleton, which had withstood decades of combat, cracked like an egg. Gorvik the Destroyer, the apex predator of the known galaxy, the creature who had never lost a fight, collapsed to the arena floor. Marcus stood over him, breathing normally, looking like he'd just finished a mild workout. The arena was silent, completely, utterly silent. Then, slowly, Marcus turned to look at the crowd. His expression was friendly again, that same mild, ordinary human expression he'd worn when he'd first entered the arena. "So," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silence, "who's next?" The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. 10,000 beings from across the galaxy sat in stunned shock, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. In the VIP section, Lady Sithara's crystalline form had turned completely transparent, a sure sign of extreme distress among her people. "Did that just happen?" she whispered to Kex Tor, who was frantically checking his recording devices to make sure they'd captured everything. "I think," Kex Tor replied slowly, "we just witnessed the end of an era." Down in the arena, Marcus was examining his knuckles with mild interest. There wasn't a scratch on them. Meanwhile, Gorvik the Destroyer lay motionless, his legendary exoskeleton cracked like a dropped vase. Dr. Yithran's voice crackled over the arena's medical communication system. "Medical team to the arena floor. We need immediate evacuation for Gorvik." She paused, as if she couldn't believe the words coming out of her own mouth. "And somebody get me a full biological scan of that human. I need to know what we're dealing with." In the commentary booth, Zeph Kal was staring at his notes in complete bewilderment. His prepared commentary about the shortest match in arena history suddenly seemed laughably inadequate. "Ladies and gentlemen," he finally managed, his voice unsteady, I honestly don't know what to say. "In 40 years of combat commentary, I have never, Throk Tar, you're the former gladiator here. What just happened?" Throk Tar, who had fought in this very arena and knew firsthand how terrifying Gorvik could be, was shaking his massive head. "I don't know, Zeph. I've studied combat my entire life, and what that human just did, it shouldn't be possible. The strength differential alone." "The strength differential is irrelevant," came a new voice from the arena floor. Marcus had apparently heard the commentary and decided to respond. "Strength isn't about muscle mass, it's about leverage, technique, and knowing exactly where to apply force." The crowd leaned forward, hanging on every word. This human was casually giving a lecture on combat theory while standing over the body of the galaxy's most feared predator. "Take Gorvik here," Marcus continued, gesturing to the fallen warrior. "Impressive physical specifications, sure, but his entire fighting style was based on intimidation and brute force. He never learned to adapt because he never had to. When you're the biggest, strongest thing in the room, you don't develop finesse." Commander Vex Thar, who had been silent since the match ended, finally found his voice. "You're saying you defeated him through superior technique?" Marcus looked up at the VIP section, somehow picking out Vex Thar among the thousands of spectators. "I'm saying I defeated him because he underestimated his opponent. Classic mistake. Happens all the time in human military history." "Human military history?" Vex Thar's mandibles clicked nervously. "You mean humans have fought wars?" The laughter that came from Marcus was genuinely amused. "Commander, humans have been fighting wars since before we learned to make fire. We've had conflicts that lasted decades, battles that involved millions of combatants, weapons that could destroy entire planets. What you just saw wasn't military training. That was just a human having a bad day. The implications of this statement rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. If this was just one human having a bad day, what were humans capable of when they were actually trying? Impossible, came a voice from the competitor section. No species could survive constant warfare. It would lead to extinction. Marcus turned to see who had spoken. It was Krix Tal, a Centaurian fighter who had been scheduled to face Gorvek in the semifinals. Like most of his species, Krix Tal was built for speed and precision, with 4 arms and reflexes that could track objects moving at near light speed. Actually, Marcus said, constant warfare is exactly what made us what we are. See, most species develop in relatively stable environments. They evolve to fill a niche, find their place in the ecosystem, and stay there. But humans, we evolved on a planet where the environment was constantly changing. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, continental drift, climate shifts. We had to adapt or die. He began walking toward the competitor section, and several fighters instinctively backed away. So we learned to be generalists. We learned to use tools, to work together, to overcome obstacles through innovation, rather than just raw physical ability. And when we ran out of environmental challenges, he shrugged. We started challenging each other. Dr. Yithran's voice came over the communication system again. All combatants are to report for immediate medical evaluation. We need to understand the physiological changes that... Dr. Marcus interrupted politely. I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. No injuries, no fatigue, no stress indicators. This is just normal human capability. Normal. Dr. Yithran's voice cracked. You just defeated a creature that our computers classified as physically impossible to kill with bare hands. Your computers were working with incomplete data, Marcus replied. They were measuring raw strength, armor thickness, claw sharpness. They didn't account for human problem-solving ability. In the stands, a Plutonian philosopher named QX Ron was frantically taking notes. This changes everything we know about evolutionary biology, he muttered to his companion. If humans can overcome physical limitations through pure intelligence and adaptability, then they're not just another species, his companion finished. They're something new entirely. The arena's management was in full panic mode. Emergency meetings were being called, insurance policies were being reviewed, and several alien governments were already placing urgent calls to their military advisors. But Marcus seemed completely oblivious to the chaos he'd caused. He was looking around the arena with genuine curiosity, like a tourist examining an interesting historical site. This is a nice facility, he commented. The acoustics are excellent, the sight lines are well designed, and the safety features are impressive. Who's the architect? The casual nature of his question somehow made everything worse. Here was a being who had just shattered every assumption about combat capability in the known galaxy, and he was complimenting the architecture. You're not what we expected, Krix Tal said, his voice cautious but respectful. The files on humans suggested you were different. Marcus tilted his head. Different how? Peaceful, diplomatic, focused on trade and cultural exchange rather than conflict. Oh, we are, Marcus confirmed. Humans generally prefer to solve problems through negotiation, cooperation, and mutual benefit. We're actually quite friendly once you get to know us. Then why are you here? Krix Tal asked. Why enter a deathmatch tournament? Marcus considered the question seriously. Because sometimes, he said finally, even the friendliest species needs to blow off steam. And because I wanted to see if the stories about galactic combat sports were true. And? They're not nearly as impressive as I'd hoped. The insult was delivered so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took a moment for the full impact to register. Marcus had just dismissed the entire galactic combat tradition as underwhelming. You think our warriors are weak? This came from Thrak-Mor, a massive Centaurian berserker who had been watching from the fighter preparation area. He was nearly as large as Gorvek had been, with cybernetic enhancements that made him even more dangerous. Not weak, Marcus corrected, specialized. You've all evolved to be perfect at fighting within your particular environmental niches. But you've never had to adapt to fighting outside those niches. Thrak-Mor's eyes blazed with fury. Then perhaps you'd like to test that theory. Marcus looked at him with interest. Are you challenging me? I am. The crowd erupted. A second match. They were going to witness another impossible confrontation. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Okay, but I should warn you. I'm starting to feel better about my week. That might make this less explosive. Less explosive? Thrak-Mor laughed. Human, I'm going to tear you apart with my bare hands. That's what the last guy said. The fighters moved to opposite sides of the arena. Thrak-Mor was already activating his cybernetic enhancements, his artificial muscles swelling to twice their normal size. Energy coursed through his modified nervous system, increasing his speed and reaction time to superhuman levels. Marcus was doing stretches again. This is unprecedented, Zeph Kal was saying. 2 championship-level matches in one day, both involving the same human competitor. And if the previous fight was any indication, the previous fight was an anomaly. Thrak-Mor's voice boomed across the arena. I've studied the recording. The human got lucky. Gorvek underestimated him, became overconfident. I won't make the same mistake. That's good, Marcus called back. Overconfidence is definitely a problem in combat situations. The referee, still shaken from the previous match, raised his prismatic arm. Combatants, prepare for whatever this is going to be. The signal sounded. Thrak-Mor didn't make Gorvek's mistake of charging blindly. Instead, he circled Marcus like a predator, his enhanced senses analyzing every movement, every breath, every micro-expression. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, watching Thrak-Mor with mild interest. You know, he said conversationally, this is much better. You're actually thinking about the fight instead of just trying to intimidate me. I'm studying you, Thrak-Mor replied. Learning your patterns, your weaknesses, your tells. And what have you learned? Thrak-Mor's grin was savage. That you're still just a human. He struck without warning, his cybernetically enhanced speed allowing him to close the distance in microseconds. His punch should have connected before Marcus could even register the attack. Marcus caught his fist. Not with effort, not with strain, but with the same casual ease he'd shown when catching Gorvek's thrown debris. Interesting, Marcus said, examining Thrak-Mor's cybernetic enhancements. These are well designed. The neural interface is particularly elegant. But you know what the problem is with cybernetic enhancement. Thrak-Mor was straining against Marcus's grip, his enhanced muscles bulging with effort. What problem? It's still based on the assumption that raw power is the answer. Marcus twisted slightly, and Thrak-Mor's cybernetic arm made a concerning grinding sound. But power without control is just noise. The arm shattered. Not just broke, not just malfunctioned. It exploded into fragments of metal and synthetic muscle fiber, leaving Thrak-Mor staring at the sparking remains of his primary weapon. How? Thrak-Mor gasped. Resonance frequency, Marcus explained helpfully. Every material has a specific frequency that will cause it to vibrate itself apart. I just found your cybernetics frequency and applied the right amount of force at the right angle. He'd done it by feel. Without instruments, without analysis, without even seeming to try particularly hard. That's impossible. Dr. Yithran's voice came over the communication system. To calculate resonance frequency requires extensive analysis and precise equipment. Only if you're trying to be scientific about it, Marcus replied. Humans have been breaking things for millennia. We've got a feel for it. Thrakmor tried to continue fighting with his remaining arm, but the battle was already over. Marcus moved with fluid precision, dismantling the cybernetic warrior piece by piece. Not brutally, not with excessive force, but with surgical accuracy that left Thrakmor intact but completely helpless. "I yield," Thrakmor finally said, his voice filled with something that might have been awe. Marcus stepped back immediately. "Good match. Your technique was much better than Gorvek's." The crowd was beyond words now. They'd just witnessed a human casually defeat two of the galaxy's most feared warriors, and he was giving constructive feedback like a combat instructor. "Is there anyone else?" Marcus asked, looking around the arena. "I mean, I don't want to be rude, but I came here for a challenge, and so far this has been more like a physics demonstration." The silence that followed was deafening. Every fighter in the arena was looking at their colleagues, wondering who would be brave enough, or foolish enough, to face this impossible human. Finally, a voice spoke up. "I'll fight him." The crowd turned to see who had spoken. It was Sarah Quinn, a human woman who had been sitting in the spectator section. "Sarah," Marcus's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I didn't know you were here. I heard about your registration and thought I'd come watch," she replied, vaulting over the barrier into the arena. "Though I have to say, you're showing off a bit." "Am I?" I was trying to be restrained. "Marcus, you just calculated resonance frequency by feel. That's not restrained, that's just being a smartass." The crowd was completely lost now. There were two humans in the arena, and they were having a casual conversation like old friends. "Wait," Commander Vexthar's voice cut through the confusion. "You two know each other?" "We went to the same engineering school," Sarah explained. "Marcus was always the overachiever of our class." "Overachiever?" Marcus protested. "You're the one who redesigned the school's power grid as a freshman project." "That was just basic optimization," Sarah replied. "You built a functioning AI for your final thesis." "It was a simple pattern recognition system. It achieved sentience." The alien spectators were listening to this exchange with growing alarm. These humans were casually discussing technological achievements that most species would consider impossible. "So," Sarah said, rolling her shoulders in a familiar stretching motion, "are we doing this or not?" "I've been having a pretty stressful week myself." Marcus grinned. "Finally. A real challenge." The referee, who was beginning to question his career choices, raised his arm again. "The combatants, prepare for human versus human combat." The signals sounded. What followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Not the brutal, overwhelming displays of power that had characterized Marcus's previous fights, but something that looked almost like a dance. The two humans moved with perfect synchronization, each anticipating the other's movements, each responding with techniques that seemed to flow naturally from years of shared experience. "They're not fighting," Zef-Kal said in wonder. "They're sparring." "It's beautiful," Throk-Tar added. "Like watching two master artists collaborate on a painting." The match went on for nearly an hour. Not because either fighter was dominating, but because both were so perfectly matched that neither could gain a decisive advantage. They were testing each other, pushing each other, exploring the limits of their capabilities in a way that was simultaneously competitive and cooperative. Finally, by mutual agreement, they stopped. "Draw?" Marcus asked, breathing hard for the first time that day. "Draw," Sarah agreed. "Though you've gotten faster since school. You've gotten stronger." They shook hands and the crowd erupted in applause. Not the bloodthirsty cheering that usually accompanied arena victories, but genuine appreciation for something they'd never seen before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Zef-Kal said, his voice filled with awe, "I think we've just witnessed the birth of a new era in galactic combat sports." In the VIP section, Commander Vexthar was frantically making notes. "Contact the Krillian High Command immediately," he told his aide. "Tell them we need to revise our threat assessment protocols for human space." "Sir." Kiltok looked confused. "But they're just one species among thousands." Vexthar looked at him with all six eyes. "Kiltalk, did you see what just happened down there?" "Yes, sir. 2 humans fought to a draw." "No," Vexthar corrected. 2 humans demonstrated that everything we thought we knew about combat, about evolution, about the limits of biological capability, was wrong. And if there are more humans like these 2... He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear. Down in the arena, Marcus was waving goodbye to the crowd. "Thanks for the entertainment, everyone. This was exactly what I needed after my bad week." "Will you be back?" someone called out. Marcus considered the question. Maybe. "But next time I think I'll bring some friends. Make it more interesting." As the humans left the arena, the crowd began to disperse. But the conversations that followed would echo through the galaxy for years to come. Because on this day in this arena, the universe had learned something important. Humans weren't just another species. They were something new, something unprecedented, something that would change everything. And they had a very particular way of dealing with bad weeks. The galaxy would never be the same.